Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
You guys, okay, not only is it Muse Day, but we've got Dan Kent, Sans hats, and he did the pushback, let's go fingers. Is that what we're calling them? Let's
Yeah,
go
sure.
fingers. I don't know. Dan, it's so good to see all of you, my friend. Like,
Yeah,
well, you know what I mean. All of it. So,
yeah.
feeling good?
I don't have much to say about it other than it's we're moving on. So it's been
This is
it's been 2 weeks since the traumatic event, and
yes.
yeah, we're healing. We're healing. So.
Okay. And you would probably like for your friend, your MuseCast partner, to just like move on, right? Like, let's not even talk about it. Why is it even worth mentioning?
For like a fraction of a second this morning, I thought, well, she might not even mention it. I'm like, yeah, whatever, So.
Oh, you'd be wrong because I'm gonna mention it. Okay, well, Dan, I'm just gonna say it's lovely to see you. Hair and all, I'm glad that you made it through that traumatic event, and let's just pray for that dear barber, hairstylist,
Yeah.
rando person that came in and traumatized you. So
yeah, definitely. Well, it's good to see you as well, and it's so good to be back on a MuseCast Tuesday. So
a MuseCast Tuesday. Yeah. So thank you all for being here. And in case you are new, he is Dan Kent. I am Shawna Boren. We are pastors we are a few of the pastors at Woodland Hills Church. And every week we come together and we dialogue. We have conversation about Sunday's sermon. And we give some different insights. We go a little deeper, sometimes a little peek behind the curtain. On occasion, when there's questions that have been sent in, we address those. And so we just say, welcome to the madness. We have a good time, and we have fantastic folks who tune in every week and then who chat in the chat. And so it's just a fun time for us all. So welcome. We're glad that you're here. Happy Muse Day. Happy Tuesday for those of you who prefer that. And today we are going to talk about, we're just still hanging out in a certain part of Revelation, still like chilling with a certain church in Revelation, still talking about this certain character in Revelation. So I'm excited to see what you have for your summary, Dan.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to do something a little different this time. Normally what I do is I take whoever, puts all of that work into organizing their sermon and laying out, this is what I'm going to say. This is the order I'm going to say it. Although I respect that, and Greg does a very good job of it, today I want to mix it up a little bit. I'm going to do the summary backwards. I'm going to totally reverse the whole thing. So now I'm not going to go, I don't mean that. I mean, I'm just going to hit the points. I'm going to hit the points backward. I'm not that talented. So,
okay.
So here's what I want to do. I want to start with where he ended. Pretty close, at least. He asked us why, or he asked us to think about who we us with, what communities do we identify with? And the reason why he asked that is because he argued that who we us with it kind of is important at this other level, at this cosmic level. That is, when we us with a group of people, that collective group takes on this form or this energy or this identity that transcends the members in the group, and it can create attention from other dimensions. And that's sort of what spiritual warfare is that the things that happen here affect what happens there and vice versa. And so he says this is especially true when we covenant, because when we covenant with a group or a person, our commitment to them, that bond, is like more official, it's more tangible, it's more succinct, it's more kind of stark. And so the attention therefore can also be more stark. And so the because of all of that, he argues that, hey, we have to be really careful who we us with. And that's sort of his second takeaway, is that we have to be careful who we us with, because it can matter at these higher levels. And he said in particular, what God is calling us to is he's calling us to be a group, this covenant body. So he wants us to enter into these covenants, these kind of well defined sort of groups, in particular the agape love group of the church, to be the body of Christ. And to enter into that is to enter into a group that is an us, that's true, but it's different than some of the other us's that we could be a part of. You know, if I say that I'm a Vikings fan, I have a them. It's the Packers fans, you know, and so or I could say if I'm a Democrat, the them might be Republicans. And but what's interesting about the kingdom of God, when you us with God's church, when you covenant with God's church, there is no them. You can be a part of the us if you want to or not, but if you're not part of the us, that doesn't mean that you're a them, because you're always welcome. And what we're going to find in Revelation here is the book of Revelation ends with the kingdom of God and an open gate. And I think that that's important. So that was his first of the two takeaways. The first one was the kingdom isn't us without a them. And number two is you have to be careful who you us with. Now, because of all of that, it gets weird, because the world doesn't seem like it's an us without a them. The world seems like it's full of us's with very well-defined thems. And he talks about how we have, in our world, we have this profound polarization where the sides are so clearly marked. And I think he's so right about that, because on any issue that you can even say, like abortion, you know what side a person is on based on how they answer. And we have everything, and we have people, and we have all answers. It's all delineated, and you could probably have like a blueprint that you could just follow and say, this is your answer here, you're part of that group. This is your answer here, you're part of that group. And that polarization creates this kind of constant hostility in our societies. And what he argues is that that is an indication that we are getting played by the principalities and powers of this present darkness. When we see all of these us's versus them, when we see how we've all been siloed into these little enclaves, into these little tribes with enemies, and when we see that our enemies are the obstacles to our own kind of fruition, when we start to think that way, that those people are our enemies and they are in the way of me becoming who I want to be or who I could possibly be, and it's their fault, and they're the problems, and they're the reason why my life is as miserable as it is, or whatever, or why it's not as good as it could be. As soon as we start doing that, Greg says we've been played. We've been played by the powers. And he says, now, it's so easy to get sucked into this, because on any one of these issues, we can transcend the particular issue. And like, for instance, we could look at, say, abortion is one of the things that we looked at, and we could transcend that and say, okay, what are the cultural themes involved here? What are the implications of this side versus that side? And you can sort of like argue with one another at this higher level, and it feels like you're being sort of objective, and you're looking at all of the stuff, but in fact, you're only at about the 5,000 foot level. What Greg says is that Revelation is this unveiling that shows us the 30,000 foot level, where we can see that the fact that you are still doing the us versus them at the 5,000 foot level, it means that you're still getting played. And at this 30,000 foot level, you see that the us versus them is the indicator that you are getting played. And you are getting played by the devil. And he has this really helpful kind of conversation again, which kind of picked up from last week, where he says, when you think of the devil, or when you think of Satan, it's really easy to fall into the caricatures of Satan, and in our minds picture the man in the red tights and the funny goatee and all of that. But he says that no, what you should look at is you should look at some of these big cultural forces of evil, and see that as that's what Satan is. Satan created that, and that's that's the indicator that there are these evil forces at play. And the example he uses is, some of the Nazi rallies, and you see all of these people using versus theming, and they get into this frenzy. And Greg talks about this German god, the Wotan, which is this god of frenzy and storm, and it's this power and so forth. And so he says that's an example, and then he actually started the message off giving an example of these Rwandan peacemakers who were not really religious at all, but upon encountering some of the civil war and some of the soldiers who had just got done killing people who they had recently been to school with, but they ended up slaughtering them. This peacemaker has this conversation with these boys, and he just has this overwhelming sense that this is more than just human activity. There is something transcendently evil about what's going on, and it's when that frenzy, that usness takes on this momentum, it can cross this tipping point, this threshold where it's no longer there's no longer humanity there. It is just evil, and the humanity can get overwhelmed by the evil of the moment. And then he started the sermon off by looking at our verse text. We're still looking at this second church, and some of the spiritual warfare there. And he talked about how the fact that Jesus is addressing the angel of the church. And I think that that's so important, because what's going on here, when you're part of a church, you're part of this us that God wants us to be a part of, to identify with, as opposed to so many of the other us's that can take on this ferocious life of its own and can compel us to be a part of something, to be complicit in something that we might not want to be complicit in. And so that is my reverse sermon. Man, there's so much more there. But that's I don't know what else to do, because there's just so many things, and I have it so coherent, even in reverse. And so yeah, what did you think of Greg's sermon?
Yeah, so I'm just going to say, like, this is one of those. I mean, we always think, by we, I mean, Dan and I, we always think you should be listening to the sermons. We know sometimes you don't have time, and we have heard that some of you even, like, you love the summary because you feel like you get a good, like, gist of the sermon if you haven't had space or time to fully listen to Greg. And I think that's great, and we're happy to help. I will say, though, for this, I think you need to go back and listen, and maybe even a couple of times, because there are different things that pop out. I'm going to back up. When I was 5, no, I'm kidding. I'm not going to back up that much. I'm going to back up to Sunday. So I'm on site, and we had some stuff going on. We were going to do a fellowship time after service. So I was kind of busy during the service getting a lot of that set up. And so I was hearing Greg, but not really, like, able to soak it in. So I needed to listen later, which I did, and which many times I do in preparation for our discussion. And so I did that. And then this morning, I had one of those awaken at 3 a.m. mornings, unable to go back to sleep. And so I was like, well, let me listen to Greg again. And so the issue with that is about 4:45 when I was listening, I am starting to drift back to sleep. And so his voice must have been in my brain when he was talking about some of these powers and principalities. And I had some wicked dreams. I was just like, oh my goodness. So I do recommend listening to the sermon. I don't recommend listening to it as you are about to enter into a sleep state, because holy buckets, that was interesting. I might need some therapy. But to his sermon specifically, I will say, I think this is really important. And I think we don't even fully know yet all the ways and why this is really important. But I do fully believe that this us versus them, I think this is huge. It is major. I think it is it is just permeating all of society. I don't care where you live. There is some sort of polarization that it's trying to suck us in at every turn. there is no longer, it feels like, a agree to disagree stance on things. It is like, oh, we don't see this the same way. Well, then we're going to duke it out. I mean, it's just insane. And I think it's really important that we talk about this. In fact, and you can research this, Dan, because you're good at this, but we did a series several years ago and it was about us versus them. It was like a little mini series, like maybe like a 2 or 3 parter or something. Again, I think that's something to go back and revisit because it is vital. It is important. And I really do believe that this is where you see the enemy at work. This is where you see these powers and principalities at play. It is in the death. It is in the destruction. It is in the division and the disunity and just the seeing one another as not the humans that we are, certainly not the children of God that we are. We are just so against one another. And I'm just really glad that that Greg again took some time to talk through that. I also love that he talked about it in a community context. This isn't just me on my own dealing with this stuff. Like I am a part of a I'm a part of a church body. I'm a part of a community. And together that means something. And so I was really encouraged by that. And it also caused me to remember, I don't know if, I know you're a reader, Dan, but I know you like to read certain things. So do you remember, it's a classic novel by William Goldie, Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies. Yes, I am familiar with that book. Yes.
Yeah. It's just like read. Hey, if you guys haven't, like read that because it's kind of like a great picture of what we're talking about. It's about a group of British schoolboys that get stranded on an uninhabited island. And initially they're all like together and we're going to survive. And before long, it just dissolves into just utter savagery. It was just awful the way that they began to like be pitted against one another. And so, anyway,
were you serious when you were asking me if I read that?
I was, because I know, look, I see you as very studious and I see you as like theology and then comic books. Like that's how
that's funny.
So I didn't know in the middle what you would have gravitated
Okay, all right, hold on a second. See, people think that we know each other really well, but things are starting to be revealed here that maybe we don't know each other as much as we thought. First of all, I hardly ever read comic books. I've read like one in the last 20 years. In my youth, I used to read them a lot more. But yes, I have read Lord of the Flies. In fact, I think I have the #1 Lord of the Flies study guide on Amazon.com right now.
Stop it.
I'm serious. Yeah. So I have a Lord of the Flies study guide and I love that book. It's one of my favorite.
Oh my God. Okay.
Books.
See, now people are going to think that we do know each other really well. And then they're going to think this is all a ploy for me to set you up to say, go to Amazon. I didn't know this. I did not know this. But this is what I will say. Dan and we work really well together and we have a lot of respect for one another and we enjoy working together. But this man is always surprising me. That's why I always talk about the proverbial bingo card that like he's always saying stuff. So now I get to mark #1 Lord of the Flies reference. What is it?
Study guide.
There you go. So
in that spirit, I'll just say that is a really great reference because you really see the us versus them happening in there. And here's what's really fascinating about that is you're so right. You described it so well how the whole thing just disintegrates and it just becomes savagery. And finally the main boy, the protagonist, he's being chased and they're going to kill him, and these other boys are going to just kill him in their savagery. And he's like on the beach and he's trying to get away from these kids who are chasing him. And finally he looks up and there are the boots of an adult. Finally, the adults are there to rescue the boys from this island. And it turns out it's this Navy officer from the Navy, which is sort of William Golding's way of showing that the same thing that happened to the boys, it's just that happened on a bigger scale on Earth, because even when they're rescued by a military because of the same savagery that's going on in the adult world. And so that's a really good, what do you call that in like television and public speaking when you refer to something like that? That's there's a name for it, but
it's not, I don't know. Okay, we'll come up with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, to me, I was just remembering that because in high school I did read that book and it had such a profound impact on me. Like I remember thinking, I hope I would never fall victim, fall prey to such savagery, such like, yeah, I just remember that. And then hearing, but again, it was just the perfect picture of this is the powers at work. This is, and I think it's important to be aware, not be afraid, but be aware so that we don't fall victim to that. So we don't get played by that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, I all this does lead us to a question for you, Dan, because I know that there are folks who maybe hear about Lord of the Flies, or they hear, Greg talking about what happened in Rwanda, or even Nazi Germany, and they just think, would never, could never, like there's just no possible way, and yet I beg to differ. And so I'm guess gosh, I'm not like declaring that over anybody, but I think that when you continually to silo away from other people who think and see things differently than you, I'm not saying you're going to automatically become that, but I'm just saying that is maybe a part of the ingredients that get you to that end point. What are your thoughts on that for those who say, okay, but that's a bit extreme. I don't know if that's where yes, it's bad today, but I don't know that we would ever go there again. What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
Well, I'm always of the opinion that if it can happen to somebody else, it can happen to us. And, you know, you just have to be, hopefully you learn lessons from those other things, not just that, what the Nazis did were bad or anything like that, but rather like, how did those people get to the point where they were duped into thinking that and doing those things? And and it's not just Nazi Germany, and we talked, when we were kind of discussing Greg's sermon on Saturday. There are other things too. I mean, there's a lot of, communists were extremely violent in China and in Russia. There, tens of millions of people were killed under these communist regimes, but we chose the Hitler one just because we have footage of it and we've got so many of the images that all of us have seen, and so we chose that as the example. But you look at some of that stuff, and it's not like Hitler didn't come on the scene and say, kill the Jews. That's not how it happened. It started in much more subtle little ways, like it's probably through humor and through jokes about Jewish people and through little animosities and kind of insults and laws and envies and all little things like that kind of accumulated into finally just taking it to the next level. And I tell you what, in terms of like, you can have a conversation and a disagreement at this very peaceful level, and then you can start to do things like name calling, and it can be very subtle stuff. Like, it doesn't even have to be like bozo. It could be something like, oh, you're just a Pelagian. Well, if you're calling your opponent a categorical name like that, you're not really respecting them as an individual. You're not listening to them as an individual. Instead, you're filtering that person through this other movement or this other person. And so you're not really listening. And so you categorize them as just that. They're not even fully human. They're just a Pelagian, or they're just a Calvinist, or they're just whatever. And it just little subtle things like that takes away their individuality, and it becomes easier for you to then talk derogatorily toward them because they're not really a full human. They're just a Calvinist. And Calvinists, they just believe that, God doesn't really care about individuals. He's just going to bulldoze his will through. And that suddenly can become, well, that means that Calvinists don't really care about people either, apparently. And you see, he just through language, like, I just pulled this out of my butt, but that's the type of thing that can happen. And pretty soon you're just dehumanizing people, and it just becomes a little bit more. And I tell you what I see too is that and I've shared this here before too, is you just look on YouTube and it's no longer like this side makes this point and then this side counters with this point. This is the counter argument. Here's the argument. Here's the counter argument. This person made a good point, but this person, no, they don't talk like that. They say things like atheist destroys Christian apologist, and they use that kind of warfare language. And well, I mean, where do you go from there? How do
Right.
how do I compete with videos with like very, catchy kind of titles like that? Well, I need to make a video that's even more aggressive because I'm competing for eyeballs here. And how that system of even YouTube algorithms compels us to be more and more aggressive. And we just get slow played into dehumanizing other people, into
Yeah.
speaking aggressively toward them. And that's the pathway toward exactly what happened in communist Russia, exactly what happened in totalitarian Germany, and
Yeah.
I see a lot of those things here, even in America that are happening right
Yeah.
now. So that's a long-winded answer, but I think it's a good
No,
question.
that is perfect the way that you answered that, because what I was hoping that we would get to, and we did, is again the reason why we feel like these last three sermons and then this one we just did were so important, and why we wanted to take some time, is because it's important to like kind of sound the alarm, like to put up the hazards and to say, you guys, okay, yeah, maybe we're not, there, but we are creating a pathway by which it is plausible that we could get there. And it
Yeah,
starts in our attitude towards others. And it
yeah,
starts in the way that we are talking about others, and maligning others. And every time we do that, you are dehumanizing.
yeah,
You are making people their ideology and not their humanity, and it's dangerous. And now, are we saying don't ever have a belief, don't ever have a moral that you feel like you stand for? No, that's not what we're saying. But what can't happen is I can't like make you a literal the devil because you don't
right,
see something the way that I do. It's
yeah,
just, and I do agree. I love social media. I think it's fun, but it's also very dangerous. I think the technology that we have literally at our fingertips has made this more pronounced. People, and I call them keyboard warriors. That's a very popular term. And then even that is kind of mean. So I probably need to stop. But people just get on those keyboards or on their phones, and they just say awful heinous things instead of, you know what, how about you don't follow that person, how about you don't look at their content or engage them? But no, you spend the time to engage that content, and then you spend the time to just rip them to shreds, and it's
yeah,
it's just not healthy.
yeah,
You mentioned it as constant hostility, and I thought that was a great way to put it. There is this constant hostility that society is living in, and that is not good. And so I think this is us just like sounding the alarm
hmm,
bells, like flashing those warning hazards and saying, let's try to pull back from that, because it is
yeah.
not going to go anywhere good.
Yeah. Have you I think I've talked about the foot in the door principle, which is I mean it's a kind of a lay kind of cultural kind of phrase, aphorism, but there was actually social psychology research done on the foot in the door principle, and it was just a fascinating study. And I'll probably botch the specifics, but it was something along these lines. There was an election happening in California, and I think this was like in the early 80s, 1980s. There's this election happening in California, and one of the candidates was a Democrat named, I don't know, just say Johnson. And so what these researchers did is they found this like rusted van, just this terrible kind of had no wheels or anything like that at a junkyard. And they took the van, it didn't even have a steering wheel, and it was like kind of dented a little bit, and it was just very ugly. And they painted it like this gaudy neon green. And then they put the word, vote Johnson in 80 for or whatever, all over the side with like some just tacky patriotic stuff on it, just this total eyesore of a van. And they went to these registered Democrat voters and house to house saying, "Hey, would you, I see you're a Democrat. Are you voting for Johnson? Yeah, we're voting for Johnson. What would you mind if we put this in your yard to kind of promote Johnson's candidacy?" And they went to like 100 houses, and like all of them are like, "There's no way you are going to put that in my yard. That's the most disgusting thing ever. No, of course not. You can't put that in my yard." So then what they did is they said, "Okay, well, let's find another 100 Johnson supporters, and we'll ask them if they would be willing to put a little Vote Johnson sticker on their screen door." And like 95% of them are like, "Yeah, sure, go ahead, put it on there, because it's just a sticker and it's on the screen door and no one's going to see it anyway." Then they looped back around saying, "Hey, we noticed that you had the Johnson sticker on your door. Would you be open to putting a bumper sticker on your car?" Well, yeah, sure, we'll put a bumper sticker on the car. And then once they had the bumper sticker on the car, they went back around and saying, "Hey, we saw that you had the bumper sticker on your car. Would you be open to putting a yard sign in your yard?" And like 80% of them are like, "Well, I got it on the car already. Yeah, sure, I'll do that." And by the end of this cycle where they just kept upping the ante, like 30% said that they would be willing to put the big ugly van in the yard. And that is exactly how the principalities and powers work. Look, I'm not saying that they are terrible people and unworthy of God's love. I'm just saying that sticker on the door. And then, well, once I've said sticker on the door, well, now, yes, I am saying that they're terrible people, but God still loves them. Okay, yes, I am saying that they're terrible people and God still, but now I'm saying that God might not love them if they continue down this path. And that's exactly how it works. And that's how you go from good people to supporting Hitler. It's just you get slow played like that. And the science says that we're all susceptible to that if we're not always on our guard. And so I just think it's so important.
Amen. That was a great example of that, Dan. I love it. And no, I hadn't heard that from you before. So
Oh,
there you
cool.
go.
Good.
Good job. Good job. All right. Well, I do think that we want to end our conversation encouraging, reminding folks how Greg ended and how you started the summary, which is, the question of who do we us with, and how we us with others, and recognizing that we are the body of Christ. We are a part of a covenant body. And so it's okay to be an us, but there is no them. We're an us without a them. And so I think that's really important. And as you are going about your life, it's important to be mindful of who you're aligning yourself with. Because like Dan just illustrated, it could start out innocent and small, and then it could snowball into something that you never intended. And so again, this is not to spark fear in anyone, but this is just like, well, hey, let's be aware. And something that Dan has said throughout this series thus far, and in other series as well, is like, let's not be played. I don't think any of us want to like be played. Like, let's just not, like, yes, there is a real enemy, and yes, there are real powers and principalities, and there are forces for evil, but there are also forces for good. And let us not be played by the evil forces. Let's not give into or feed the negativity, the hatred, the division. There has to be a way to believe what we believe, to stand for what we stand for without demonizing someone who we see as on the other side. That means as a Lakers fan, I'm not going to demonize Dan because he's a Timberwolves fan and his team's doing better than mine. Like, it's as simple as that. But then, my gosh, you could see it at sporting events. People lose control. They lose their ever-loving minds, and it's just a game. Like, so if it can happen in that easy peasy context, it happens in Little League and on kids soccer fields every week. Like, people lose their minds. And so there's this constant hostility that we just need to not be played by and not give into. And so that wasn't a nugget. That was just like a, hey,
Wow.
a little reminder, like where
that was
Dan
nugget
started
worthy
and Greg ended.
Yeah. That
Well, thank you, sir.
that was nugget worthy for sure.
I appreciate it. Is there anything that's not your nugget that you want to tack onto that, or just, that maybe you didn't get to address or say
Yeah. Well, just
in our
to tack on to what
conversation?
you were just saying, which I think was beautiful, succinct. I would just say that there's probably a couple exceptions. Like if you ever watched the Timberwolves lately, I mean, that you could lose your mind over because they're just that good. I mean,
They
oh
are
my
good. They
goodness.
are good.
They
They're
are
really good.
they're shockingly good. And like they're not just like, hey, they might have a chance good. They're like, I don't know if anybody else has a chance against them good.
I know.
So
I know.
I'm not going to
Oh,
lose my mind about it, but I might. I might lose my mind about it. So it's they're that
okay.
good. So
A little bit of permission there. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
One more thing I think that you and I talked about, Dan, was just, and you had said this a bit in your summary discussion time, that the reason why Greg brought up the certain examples that he did, specifically Nazi Germany, was because we have footage of that, and we have there's a lot of research that we have, things that we can show. And so Dan and I say this all the time, whenever we're going down a path and we're pulling things from real time or real history, like as examples, like to illustrate a point, there is no way that we could, there's no time, there's not a time in the world like to pull all the things,
Right,
that
right.
would be pertinent to a certain point.
Yeah.
But I also want to say that, like, there are certain things, depending on who you are, how you're wired, how you think, and what matters to you, there are certain things that are going to be a glaring, like, what about this? Like, why would you not bring up this as an example of the powers and principalities at play?
Yeah.
And it's not because we're ignoring those things. It's just, we brought up these certain ones, not discounting others, and you're going to gravitate toward things and see things through a lens that matter to you. And so
Yeah.
that's just a little aside that,
Here's the other thing too is I think people give us way too much credit for like the expanse of our knowledge, and that we just always have the perfect thing to say at the perfect time. And I was just thinking, like, I played I was quarterback in junior college, and then after college.
wait.
I was.
Okay, guys, get out your bingo card. Dan QB'd his junior college team. What was your mascot, Dan?
I don't even remember. I was only there for like half a year, and then I went to Bethel, and so I don't even remember. And I did not play at Bethel because I was a serious student. But the point is that after college, I played this flag football kind of league, and I kept getting. I was quarterback. I can throw so accurately, and I love throwing a football, but I kept getting sacked, and like the guy who's supposed to block the other player just wasn't doing very good, and I kept getting sacked, and I was so frustrated, and we lost the game. And after the game, my friend who was there was just like, and I feel so stupid, but he said, "Well, how come you didn't just back up more?" Now you tell me I should have backed up more. That was the answer.
My goodness.
But in the heat of the moment, I just didn't think to back up more. I was just like, gosh, he keeps sacking me. It's like, if I just would have backed up, I would have been. And the same thing is with, well, how come you didn't use this example? A lot of times there are better examples, but in the heat of the moment, we get what we get. So
we get what we get, and we're never like intentionally like, oh, we're not going to talk about that example. Like that's just not. Yeah, we don't do all that. The other thing I have to say is that watch out, Patrick Mahomes, because Dan Kent may decide to come out of retirement and give you a run for your money.
I'll tell you,
he has the secret.
Here's what I'll say. I was profoundly, like, I don't even know how I do it. That's how accurate I am with a football. Like you point to something, I'll hit it with a football. I don't even know how I do it. But here's the thing is that I can't hand the ball off to the running back. I have all sorts of problems because it's so precise, and I screw that up all the time. One time I lined up behind the wrong guy to take the snap, and he was very shocked when he felt my hands around his nut cup. And so just I could do one thing really well, but the other things not as much. So I don't think Patrick Mahomes has to worry about anything.
Okay.
So.
Well, I think our MuseCast peeps definitely got more than they bargained for today. So there you go. And this is a perfect time. Like, let's do it. Let's head into nugget time. Let me
Yeah.
see your nugget day.
Woohoo! Yeah.
Here we go.
We probably
All right.
should have gone to nugget time about 3 minutes ago, probably.
Yeah,
So
yeah. But sometimes you get a little
yeah.
distracted and you go down the path of a story, and next thing you know, you're hearing stuff that you just never wanted to hear.
Yeah,
That's the
right.
way it goes. All right, Dan. Do you want to redeem yourself and go first
Yeah, I'll go
with your
first.
nugget, or do you want to redeem yourself by ending? Okay, you're going to go
No,
first.
I'll go
Sounds
first.
good.
I'm just sharing a Bible verse, and
Okay.
this is one of those kind of imperatives in the New Testament that I think if we lived this way, it would short circuit a lot of the enemy's attempts at the foot in the door principle, at slow playing
Yeah.
us to these higher levels of maliciousness. If we lived this way, it would prevent a lot of this, and we find this in 1 Thessalonians 5:11, where Paul says, "Therefore, encourage and comfort one
Mm,
another. Build up one another, just as you are doing." And if we made it our mission in life to build others up, that makes it really hard to tear them down. And if
yeah.
we made it our mission to encourage one another, that would be really hard for us to insult one another while we're also trying to encourage one another. And so those types of things I think are just so good at protecting
Hmm.
us from getting slow played. And that
Hmm.
is my nugget.
I like it. My nugget is a little personal, but I was thinking about like how like one of the ingredients that comes into play when we are being slow played and we end up, feeding into the hostility frenzy and becoming a part of it. And I think a lot of it, not all the time, I think a lot of it stems from fear. So we're afraid of something, someone losing something, or we're afraid what could happen. I think fear then sparks this need to defend, and then that just spirals, into all kinds of things. And so I definitely feel like it's something we should be mindful of, not allowing the enemy, the powers, the principalities to instill, like, just drop little nuggets of fear in our hearts and in our minds. Because I think when you are fearful of a person or a situation, then that definitely makes it hard to see the value and the good because you are in this protective state. Um, and then I think it's important too, like when we do experience things in life or encounter things in life that don't go well, don't let that be the author of that person, that people group, that situation for the rest of time. Like I just think we can't do that. And so specifically, sadly, we had a couple in our church that were beloved, and they volunteered in a lot of different areas, and they were a part of our church for a very long time. And sadly, they were killed in an auto accident early in the weekend. And then as the story begins to come out, you discover that the driver that caused the accident was under the influence of alcohol. And so that is awful and devastating. And my heart hurts because of these lives that were lost unnecessarily. But then I always also have to remember, like, this person who caused this accident, I have to not villainize that person. I need to pray for that person who walked away. They're totally fine physically, but I can't make that person an enemy because they took something away from our community.
Yeah.
And nor, you know what I mean? So I think that it's important, like when you do face real situations, like we will in life, and there'll be real opportunities to really be like, that was wrong, and yeah, that was wrong, but then we turn that into that person is that person, and then we start to identify them as the evil bad thing that they did, and not a person who made a really bad choice in life. I think that's just a small way in which we can be mindful to not like be played.
Mm-hmm.
Be devastated, yeah, absolutely. Am I sickened that someone was in a place where they had substances in their system that impacted their drive? Yeah, that's sick and disgusting to me. but that person is still a person and is still a child of God that God loves. And so I just need to pray that they will begin to live their life in a way that aligns with that, instead of whatever it is that they're going through that would cause them to behave in a way that they did, which caused the awful consequences of their actions. So that is my nugget. It's like, yeah, when we encounter stuff that we are fearful of, or maybe it's because something happened in real life, we just cannot allow ourselves to go down that rabbit hole of dehumanizing the person, the people group that we see that caused us that pain. We need to still see that person the way that God sees them, and pray that they will align themselves better with the things of God, instead of being hurt and acting out in that hurt. I don't know. That was kind of sloppy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think you're making multiple points there, and you're trying to fuse multiple points into one nugget.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Your nugget is turned into an Oreo cookie, is what that's the problem. And it's like a chocolate dipped Oreo cookie. So that's
yeah.
But
that was too many things trying to come together as one.
And I think part of why it's relevant is because so much of what we're talking about are these static issues where, what is your opinion about this issue? What is your opinion about that issue? What do you think of these people? What do you think of those people? But like yours is like, no, what do you think of this person who did this thing to you? And all of these principles apply even more so at that level, even though processing those situations might involve separation, it might involve grieving, it might involve all sorts of things, but it's still the same principles are at play there. And I think those are the really the tough things that we have to face and deal with. And so I think it's very relevant, but it was very, I'll say this, it was very new. It was very complex nugget is what it was. So
that was probably more a discussion and not nugget. And so I'm sorry, guys, but Dan cleaned it up for me nicely. And there you go. There's the quid pro quo. See, now I can't even speak. It's it's the way we help one another out. So I'm super thankful for that. Hopefully the point somehow got through. So it's on these, smaller individual levels, but then it does play into these bigger community, global, blah, blah, blah levels. So anyway, we're done.
Yep.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for sending in questions and stuff. And we look forward to chatting with you later. And seriously, listen to this one and do some reflection to see how you can learn and grow and not be slow played. None of us want that.
That's
all right. Thank you, guys. Take care. Have a great week.
Oh, come on. Hold on. I hate it when the buttons disappear. Hold on. Okay, hold on. Here it goes.
Oh my God.
It's still not, it keeps disappearing.